you mentioned in one of your last talks that petroleum wasn't what we thought it was, that it wasn't a fossil fuel, that it didn't come from fossil animals.
Yeah.
Is it just a mineral? Is it a mineral like any other mineral? Is that how it, what would you say? What's the origin of
You see,
petroleum?
when they first found petroleum, because they were beginning to make motors and needed on axles or wheels on railroad trains and all that sort of thing, and remember, trains started in the beginning of the 19th century, then oil went from just a lubricant to a fuel, and it made it valuable. And Rockefeller happened to be the smartest man in the business at the time, but he made most of his money, or much of it, off the transport of the petroleum as well as selling it. But one thing they realized was, because oil is putting a price on oil is like putting a price on a pail of water. You know, no initial cost. It's in the ground, and in those days they were, some of it almost what you'd call surface mining the oil. They didn't go down deep. So in order to get the price up, they hit on the idea that they would have to make it appear to be scarce. That boy, after we take the next few barrels out, we're probably going to have to close as well. You know, that kind of thing. Well, a very fortuitous event. In 1892, there was a convention in Geneva of scientists to determine what organic substances are. Well, the definition of organic is a substance with hydrogen, oxygen, and carbon. And so it's usually a living substance, a tree. You analyze a dead tree, hydrogen, carbon, and oxygen, and grass and so on, living things. Animals, we are hydrogen, oxygen, and carbon. So at this Geneva Convention, Rockefeller took advantage of sending some scientists over who said oil, petroleum, is hydrogen, oxygen, and carbon. Therefore, it must be derived from the spoiling, the rotting of formerly living matter. And playing the game properly, when this scientific convention was over, they defined oil as the residue from formerly living matter. Well, that makes it a fossil fuel. I don't know why they decided to use the word fossil, but it says formerly living matter is fossil. Well, of course, today, and another thing we should know is that there has never been a fossil, a real fossil, found below 16,000 feet. And you can't argue at 16,000 as a level line because someplace the ground sinks and so on. But 16 is what the scientists say, 16,000. We mine oil, or we drill for oil, at 30,000, 33,000, 28,000 every day of the week. So right there we rule it out that it isn't fossil fuel. It's called fossil fuel for the minds of the public to feel that it is an asset that is running out, being depleted. We talk about depletion allowance, which is a lot of, you know. And actually, if you know the world's oil supply, you know that it is not going to run out for an awfully long time. It is the second most prevalent liquid on Earth. And we haven't begun to... Well, with all that background, you see, the people in charge of the petroleum business, for perfectly reasonable business things, like any other man in the business, wants to keep his price as high as he can get away with. And the way to do is just say, well, there's no more. The last barrel is going to cost $1,000, and then it's all done. And they preach that stuff. What bothers me is that in geology books, it's in there. The geologists say it's a fossil fuel. Somehow they've been bought. I went to a 4-year federal staff energy seminar run by the government of the United States during the so-called energy crisis. I was the participant that represented the railroad industry. The airline industry was there. Every AA, administrative assistant of senators and congressmen, was there. The CIA was there, the Defense Department was there, the State Department was there. Sometimes sitting right in front of me in the row would be Henry Kissinger with his friend, the head of Department of Defense, That's too bad. I can't put the names with them. But anyway, people like that, top men in the government, sitting there listening to the Federal Staff Energy Seminar. Well, what this was doing is for 4 years, they were teaching a propaganda line to the leading people in this country, and therefore to the leading people in the world, when you include the Schlesingers, Kissinger and Schlesinger, among others. And the object of it was, as Kissinger used in his own terms when it was time for him to speak, to create a world price for oil. In other words, not 30 cents a gallon here and 90 cents a gallon there, but let's get a world price. That's their goal, and they're trying to do that for wheat and everything else. We don't realize what the controls are, whether it's oil or some of these other things. Almost everything today is being categorized at the highest price they can possibly make it go. And so calling petroleum a fossil fuel is the basis for this system with respect to petroleum. And I don't know if the name Arthur Kantrowitz rings any bell. Arthur Kantrowitz is the head of the Kantrowitz Labs set up by the Avco company near Boston, scientific laboratories. And a great man in the scientific world. And Kantrowitz and I were sitting at a table at this seminar once, and the table happened to be all young college grad, PhD geologists. And so just to get a conversation started, I turned to Kantrowitz and I said, Arthur, what do you think about this foolishness of these speakers talking about fossil fuel? And it was kind of put up. He started laughing. He said, you know, that gets me. He says, I don't have a geology degree, but he had 1,000 other degrees. And he said, I don't understand. He said, you'd think that these heads, these other fellows at the table, we did it on purpose, start listening, you know. And he asked, he said, are you gentlemen? He says, you're here at the meeting. Are you gentlemen by any chance geologists? And one fellow, yes, I am. And the other, yeah. He said, well, why don't you tell me? He said, why is oil? You know, and he went on like that. We brought the house down because nobody could argue with Kantrowitz. He like Einstein. People aren't going to. And he told him right there. He said, just drop it. But it's in all the books and in all the papers. But it started from that strange meeting in 1892, a scientific convention. I have a big, thick scientific encyclopedia put out by the Die Van Oosteren Company that's about 15 years old now, but it has the whole story of the conference. It doesn't have the Rockefeller part, but it has the whole story of how they straightened out organic chemicals and how it was all figured, and they've got petroleum right in there.
Amazing. Amazing. So
these aren't accidental things, you see. There's a dollar sign behind almost everything.
Okay, so the Foucault's pendulum, often used to prove the spin of the Earth on its axis, and the premise is that you suspend a pendulum that's free to spin in any direction, and you set it off swinging, and the spin of the Earth below the pendulum is measured on some sort of measuring device, in this case a compass, and from an observer it appears over a certain time period, dependent upon where you are on the Earth, the pendulum seems to be moving around, in this case at the North Pole, clockwise. If we now traverse to the South Pole, you'll see that the opposite happens, and it indeed goes anti-clockwise. If you were to set one at the equator, then the swinging motion of the pendulum would indefinitely remain aligned, since it is always going to be the same with respect to the spin of the Earth on its axis. An extremely important requirement for the pendulum to be effective is for the bob to be as massive as possible. They're usually lead with brass coating to make them extremely heavy. You'd struggle to pick one of these things up. So the more massive the object, or the bob, the better the pendulum effect will be. So in order for the pendulum to work effectively, it requires a really tall building to suspend it from. Typically 15 metres upwards is ideal, but the longer the better. And they do appear to exist in the northern and in the southern hemisphere, and they do indeed, by all accounts, spin anti-clockwise in the southern hemisphere and clockwise in the northern hemisphere. It's pretty difficult to or time consuming to actually verify this, because you'd have to be stood there for hours on end to see any meaningful change. But I've got no reason to doubt they work, and they're said to work using the Coriolis effect, or the Coriolis effect acts upon them. So these were first publicly demonstrated in February of 1851 in the Paris Observatory. So let's start in Paris, and we'll draw a yellow line up to the North Pole, and the red line represents the rotational direction of the Earth to the east. We'll put on there the pendulum, a much larger pendulum, and the two balls, the orange balls, represent the extremities of the swing of the pendulum. Notice they are aligned with the north, so as the Earth rotates to the east, the pendulum wants to stay in the direction that it was originally swung, and the North Pole is still pointing north. So if you measure the angular difference between the first point and the second point, shown in green, you'll find that the angular speed is proportional to the sign of the latitude. Meaning if you were kidnapped and flown to a secret location and put in a room with only a Foucault's pendulum, a clock and a calculator, you should be able to determine exactly the latitude that you're at on the Earth. Now some Foucault pendulums, like the one in this picture, they have the 4 cardinal points marked on them, and some have the individual degrees, the 360 degrees in between as well. My point being that the effects of the Foucault pendulum aren't just confined to the room that the pendulum's within. For instance, that north line there will extend out of the room and continue all the way to the North Pole. And at any given point along that line, the exact same principles that are occurring within the room the pendulum is in itself is occurring along that entire line, albeit at varying different angular velocities depending on your latitude. Logically then, if we were to scale this Foucault pendulum up and set it over France, so we're travelling from southern France to northern France, a distance of about 500 miles, travelling due north. Let's say that we scale the bob up to the size of a bus, and we sit in the bus, and we are travelling at a velocity of 500 miles an hour. So we're going 500 miles and travelling 500 miles an hour, so it'll take an hour. Now, assuming the pendulum was released from the south so that it is travelling exactly north, after 1 hour, will we still be travelling north, or will we be travelling northeast as the Foucault pendulum would dictate? Well, according to the maths, at a latitude of 50 degrees in northern France, we should have rotated by about 11.5 degrees to the east in our giant swinging pendulum. After all, during the swing of the pendulum, it just wants to go in the direction it was originally swung. It's not until you reach the end of the swing at either end that the eastward motion of the Earth will kind of tug on the pendulum and cause it to move across the Earth. And since we're only talking about one large swing for the entire 500 miles, then this tugging action to cause it to move eastward would not occur. So if we now gave the bus some wings and some engines and cut the wire, Would it behave in the same way? Well, no, it wouldn't. It doesn't. It's not what we see. We don't have to make any sort of correctional track changes to account for the plane's tendency to want to go in the same direction as it was originally launched. So let's piece together and paraphrase exactly what's being claimed by science for the explanation of the Foucault pendulum. So what they're saying is a mass, the more massive the better, moving at velocity above the Earth but independent from the Earth, will tend to continue on the same trajectory with respect to space, not with respect to the Earth. Let's look at a visual representation of what's being claimed. So what I've got here is a pendulum. I've suspended it from as high as I can get with my tripod. And there's a bob on the bottom, and I've fixed it to this platform that rotates. So I just want to show the effect of the Foucault's pendulum. So this would represent your destination, i.e. northern France. Let's say that's southern France. And let's set the pendulum off going straight as we can, and in one swing I'm going to rotate this platform very slightly to show the effect. So here we go. So it's moved, apparently the destination's moved left, and this pendulum is still swinging in the original direction that it was launched from. So that would be the 11.5 degree difference that we calculated earlier. So I'll just point out that this motion here, that the fact that it appears to spin on the spot, it's not through any external force what is proposed. This is just purely where it wants to go. No force is being applied anywhere. The Coriolis effect is exactly that, an effect. The Coriolis acts on nothing. It's just an outcome, a visual outcome of what happens when an object moving at a velocity across another rotating object. That's all it is. So the Coriolis is just an effect. It's acting on nothing. There's nothing, no force acting to make it go in that, to make it spin. So what I want to know is, what is different about this mass than any other mass on this planet? What is it that's different about a pendulum that differs from a plane? If this was an aeroplane, if we go back and say that's the destination, this is an aeroplane, the aeroplane does this. The Foucault's pendulum does this. Why? What's different about this mass to an aeroplane? Well, I have my own theory on the matter, and I believe that there is no difference. In that initial first swing, there is absolutely no difference between an aeroplane and a pendulum, or any mass for that matter. It's my belief that the difference is that a pendulum is an oscillating object, and at the end point of the swing, when it reaches its extremity and it turns to come back, that's where I believe the spinning effect is coming from. Remember, there are vortexes, spinning vortexes everywhere in nature. In fact, magnetism is, by definition, a vortex. So the reason that an aeroplane doesn't behave the same way as a pendulum is that A, it's moving in a linear direction, there's no oscillating component to it, and B, the Earth isn't spinning. Then when you consider things like the Allais effect, which is the anomalous behaviour of pendulums during a solar eclipse, which some people claim to have witnessed, you start to think that perhaps this is a magnetic effect. Perhaps the solar eclipse creates some sort of electromagnetic disturbance. Unfortunately for me, however, being in the UK, we're not expecting another total solar eclipse until the year 2090. and the next deep partial eclipse won't be till 2026. That, and I haven't got a full quartz pendulum, kind of prevents me from testing this phenomenon. But I am still testing my gyroscopes. If you watch my rigidity in space video, you'll see why, and why the gyroscope appears to behave very, very similar to a full quartz pendulum, in that it wants to remain rigid in the same orientation as it was originally spun up. So, I hope you enjoyed the video. Look out for the results of my gyro experiment, and thanks for watching.
Shivai, Bashar.
And to you, Shivai.
Greetings, old friend. During our last interaction, my question to you was about our government, and you said
we talked
that
about
we
the idea of the difference
our
between
government.
a republic and a democracy. Yes.
No, but you said we are.
You
our
are
government.
you
Become
are.
our government.
You are your
Well,
government.
Our government appears to be. My question is in several parts.
Yes.
Having to do with the Illuminati bankers and the fact that it appears very clear at this point, with no doubt, that there are forces that have seized control that are out to kill large numbers of people.
Stop. One of the other things in terms of information that will no longer be coming through this terminal will be the support of fearful theories.
It's not a theory.
Stop. What we are saying is, we understand that people like you're describing exist. We understand that people on your planet have those kinds of intentions. But the point we made is that you all put them there. So if you don't want them there, remove them. Empower yourselves to empower them to be true people and not people acting out of fear. And remember, again, there is no just one world. You are constantly shifting to different parallel realities. So whatever vibrational state you choose to be in is going to ultimately be the parallel Earth you will experience. If you keep focusing on the idea of those who are trying to control and focusing on the ideas of fear, that will be the kind of world you will experience. But at the very same time, the people that focus on the idea of self-empowerment will ultimately, at the same time, experience another parallel Earth where no such people exist.
Well, isn't everybody in this room experiencing the same reality at this time?
No, that's the point that you're missing. They're not. You are experiencing similar realities by agreement, but they're actually not the same.
So is there people in this room that don't have any clue and won't be affected at all by the FEMA camps, the 78 million coffins that our government has already ordered?
There are
for
those
American
that will be
citizens?
affected by it because they choose to live in fear. There are those that will never see it because they don't. It's that literal.
Can you share with us if the population of the planet is going to be significantly reduced?
Which
this
planet?
Year? Earth.
Which Earth?
This current reality, this
You're
current
missing the
collective.
point. You are shifting from parallel reality to parallel reality billions of times per second. Decide what reality you prefer. Some Earths will be depopulated, some won't. Any variation of this idea that you can imagine is real. Shift to the one you prefer. They're all real. Shift to the one you prefer. Period. You understand? They're all real. Shift to the one you prefer.
Yes and no. I understand what you're saying about
No, you
reality
obviously don't.
creation. You're right. I mean, I don't, because I wish I knew how to shift to a world where
you are
everything was
shifting.
hunky-dory,
You are always shifting. The way you shift to the world you prefer with the energy you prefer is to be that energy yourself first and stop buying into the ideas of fear.
But I try and look at reality of the world around me and interpret it.
You are forgetting what we talked about in the sense that every single thing is fundamentally neutral and has no built-in meaning. It doesn't matter how it looks. Remember, The measure of the fact that you have changed is not based on whether the outside changes. It's based on whether your response to the outside changes, regardless if it looks the same. That's how you know you will not be affected by anything you don't prefer to be affected by. Because that's the energy state you've created, and it doesn't matter how it looks, and it doesn't matter what anyone else's intention is toward you. You cannot be affected by someone's intention until you believe you can be or choose to be.
So are there people in this reality right now that, just looking back to the past, were not affected and didn't have a negative result from all the actions that have been taken so far?
Yes. Wrap your mind around it. Thank you.
Thank you.